Hey everyone. So today we are going to discuss a game between Tigran Petrosian and Mikhail Botvinnik from the Botvinnik Petrosian Championship of 1963. Let's get on to the game. C4. So Petrosian opens with the English opening. G6, D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, D5. So Botvinnik goes for the Grunfeld defense. Knight F3, Bishop G7, and E3. Castles, Bishop E2, D takes C4 now, trying to waste a tempo of the white bishop. Bishop takes C4, and now C5, and now D5, and now E6. We shall see that this E6 move creates a weakness for black, because of which white is able to come up with a brilliant plan and able to win the game. Let's see what this plan is. So if you can notice here that after the move E6, if D takes E6, then queen takes D1 check. And now if you take with the knight, if you take back with the knight, then it's it's like wasting a tempo because the knight is already well suited on the C3 square. So the king has to take, and then the king will lose the castling rights, but instead black will also have a weakness on the E6 square. Let's see how this goes. So after E6, Petrosian goes for D takes E6. Now queen takes D1 check, king takes D1, as we already discussed. Bishop takes E6, bishop takes E6, and now F takes E6. So as you can see already here, that black has a weakness on this E6 square, and as we all know, we shall discuss how the principle of two weaknesses play an important role in this game. King E2, getting the king out of the D file. Knight to C6, rook to D1, rook a D8, and now Petrosian goes for kind of an endgame. Rook takes D8, rook takes D8, and now knight G5, trying to attack this E6 weakness. So rook defends with rook E8, and now knight G E4, offering a trade of knights. Knight takes E4, knight takes E4, and now since the knight on E4 attacks the C5 pawn, B6. So as this is the critical position where we have to find a plan. So what is the plan here? Well, as you can see here that black has a weakness on this E6 pawn. And as we already said about the principle of two weaknesses, if your opponent has two weaknesses and we are able to attack them continuously at the same time, then the opponent will have to, suffer some kind of a material loss, or will have to go into passive defense. And that is exactly what Petrosian does in this game. Black already has a weakness on this E6 square, and if you look at the position, then black has a majority on the queen side, 3 pawns, and white has a minority on the queen side, that is 2 pawns. White has a majority on the king side with 4 pawns, whereas black has 3 pawns on the king side. So the material is equal, but white is trying to find a way to attack this E6 pawn, which is the main weakness. So from now on, we will see how white is able to squeeze out a weakness in the black's queen side as well, with a sort of, not a minority attack exactly, but white goes through a maneuver really precisely, which is able to give a black a weakness on the queen side and ultimately lose this weakness, lose this pawn. So we shall see how does Petrosian able to do this. So since now the bishop on G7 is attacking the pawn on B2, white wants to activate this bishop. So now rook to B1, defending this pawn. Knight to B4, attacking the pawn on A2. But now bishop to D2, because if you play knight takes A2, then we can see this variation: rook to A1 and knight to B4. And now rook takes A7. If bishop takes B2, then bishop takes B4, C takes B4, and we can already see that black will have three weaknesses in this position. And with the move rook to B7, he will already have a fair edge in this game. So obviously Botvinnik does not go for this variation, and he plays knight to D5. Now A4. A4 stops B5, even though B5 cannot be played temporarily immediately because C5 hangs. But obviously, the main plan for black here is to push these pawns upward to the board and create a pass pawn on this queen side, because black has a majority on this queen side, right? So black wants to push these pawns upward with the aid of the rook and the knight, and then create a pass pawn here, and then eventually win the game. So a4 is a very good prophylactic move which stops b5. Rook to c8. Now b3, stopping c4. As we already discussed that black wants to play, push this pawn and then create a pass pawn. So b3 stops c4, and now bishop to f8, and now rook to c1. After bishop to e7 is kind of waiting move. Black is trying to find out a plan, while white has a very good plan in his mind, which is that he wants to, and it is magical how white is able to do this, because even though white has a minority here, white is able to create a weakness on this queen side and eventually win this pawn. We'll see that. Now after bishop to e7, white plays a really nice move, b4, taking advantage of this pin of this c5 pawn. So now c4. So as you can already see here, black advanced this pawn, and we'll see now that how white is able to isolate this pawn from the rest of its peers and then able to hammer down on this pawn, eventually winning it. So now immediately b5, which cuts off this protection of this of its b pawn. So now this pawn is looking isolated, right? This c pawn is isolated, and now white will use his forces in order to win this c pawn. King to f7, bishop to c3, blockading, bishop to a3, rook c2, knight takes c3, rook takes c3. Now bishop to b4, and now rook to c2. Now king to e7, and now knight to d2. The main motive here is that white wants to take this pawn, right? It has created an isolated pawn on the c file, and now it wants to just take this pawn. So now if black gives up his bishop, then obviously this will be a very good position for white, because after taking down the bishop, then obviously this pawn is gonna fall. So after knight to d2, black pushes c3, and now knight to e4. Again, the plan is to get the king into here and then win this pawn with the aid of the king. So that is what white wants to do here. So now bishop to a5, and now king to d3, rook to d8 check, and now king to c4. And now if you again go checking, then after king to rook to c8, then white will play king to b3, and then win this pawn obviously, and black will have no counterplay. So instead of checking again, black goes rook to d1, trying to find some counterplay through this h file. So now knight takes c3. So now white is up a pawn. White has eventually won this pawn, which was a majority pawn on the queen side, and now it has also this weakness on this e6. So the position is looking very good for white, and the situation is drab for black. Let's see how black tries to create chances. So now rook to h1, attacking the h pawn, knight to e4, rook takes h2, and now king to e4. White is not worried about rook takes g2 because of rook to c7 check. And after rook to c7 check, the position immediately falls apart because of after, let's say, king to d8, then obviously rook takes h7 is coming, rook takes a7 is coming. So black does not want to happen. So after king to d4, black plays king to d7, not allowing white to invade with rook to c7 check. Now g3, protecting the g pawn, and now bishop to b6. Now actually the engine shows here that white is actually plus 2.3. So the position is actually one for white, but it still needs technique for white to win this game. Let's see how Petrosian is able to control and convert this position at the same time. So now Petrosian has a very simple plan. What's the plan? He wants to get in here through e5, f6, and g7, and then eventually, he will have lots of weaknesses to attack. After he comes to e5, then he will have this e6 pawn to attack. Then he can come to f6, and then g7, then h7 will be a weakness again. So that is the simple plan for white. So that's why king e5, and now rook h5 check, king f6, and now bishop e7 check, king g7. Now the h7 pawn is a weakness, and now Botvinnik pushes e5, rook to c6, finally invading into the 6th rank. Now rook to h1, rook to f7, okay, sorry, king to f7, rook to a1, but rook to a6 now, attacking this bishop, bishop to d8, now rook to d6 check, and now king to c8, and now king to e8, again attacking this bishop. So now bishop to c7, and now knight to rook to c6. Now if rook takes this pawn on a4, then obviously after rook knight to c3, and let's say something like rook to a5, then knight to d5 is coming, and you will have to forget this bishop. So that is the plan here. So black does not allow this, and he plays rook to d1, knight to g5, attacking this h7 pawn. Now rook to d8 check, king to f7, rook to d7 check, king to g8, and now at this position, black resigns and Tigran Petrosian wins the game. Why? Because obviously black is down a pawn here, and black has too many weaknesses in the camp. And this e5 pawn is a weakness. This h7 pawn is a weakness, and soon after h7 falls, automatically g7 also becomes weakness. And with no counterplay on the queen side, black is completely lost, even though it doesn't seem materially lost or anything like that. So that's it. I think the main takeaway from this game is about the position after the 17th move, that is b6. It is quite critical to understand what's the plan here for both sides. Black wants to push the pawns upward, while white wants to create another weakness on the queen side. And ultimately, in this game of strategy, in sides of strategy, ultimately after this move, which move was that? Yeah, after this b4 move and b5, even this pawn turns into a weakness, and black has actually lost all hope at this point itself. We can see that. We can say that if we want to be, kind of chess geniuses or chess masters, whatever you say that. So I hope you enjoyed the game and had some good insights from this game. So thank you, and I'll see you again.